Good evening, everyone. My name is Vadim Perlovsky, and welcome back to another wonderful tasting with a virtual tasting society. Today, we're excited to welcome back Old Forester. It's a brand we know and love. Haven't touched base with the Old Forester in a couple of years. I know we back in 2020, we were the first people in the nation to try the new single barrel strength bourbon when it was coming out. Joining us today is Joseph Brooke. He's the California. Are you California or Southern California or what?
Yeah, I'm sort of the Huckleberry for the West Coast. We just hired someone for the North, but consider me like Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii if they ever approve my travel requests.
Very cool. Yeah. So our West Coast representative for Old Forester, Joseph Brooke. He's been fantastic in helping us set this up with us. So hope you're all excited. We have a stellar lineup, and anyone that picked up in person will have a nice tasting mat. The ones that I shipped will not have those tasting mats because they were too big to fit, and they would have come in folded and tiny. But today we're trying the what is the name for those? The vintage ones. They're Whiskey Row, right?
It's the Whiskey Row. It
Yeah,
was
so
named after. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll save myself.
No, please,
yeah.
please.
Called Whiskey Row because the originally downtown Louisville, way back in the day, the main street, which Brown-Forman headquarters is to this day still located on, that was known as Whiskey Row because every other door was a distillery. This is way back. Then starting in 1870. Imagine a pretty good time to be a drinker.
Is going to be 1870, right?
Yeah. So the goal with this, I mean, unless you have more stuff to say, I mean, I love diving right in.
Just the last of it. Welcome to anyone who's here for the first time. Welcome back to anyone who's a regular. I think by now everybody knows the drill. We're here to get nerdy. We're here to ask questions. Feel free to participate in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. All we ask is that we don't talk over each other. So if you're not actively participating in the conversation, keep yourself on mute, just like I will. And if you do unmute yourself accidentally, I will help by muting you. So please don't be offended. Other than that, like I said, enjoy the presentation, ask questions, get nerdy, and we'll go from there. Joseph, please. Joe, take it away.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Vadim. Hello, Internet. How are we doing? Question, a show of hands for those of you that have your cameras on. Which ones of you have already attended some sort of Old Forester training in years past? One? Okay. A couple of hands right there. I see Maria right there. I'm just trying to figure out how much I can actually make up. Let's be honest, during the history of alcohol is written by people who are probably drinking at the time, and take it with a grain of salt. What's interesting about Old Forester, though, this is a brand. To give you a little background about me, I was a bartender for about 16 years before I jumped over to the brand side. And Old Forester, even before the thought of joining Brown-Forman was on my radar, Old Forester had always been my well. As far as a cocktail base, price, quality, that whole convergence really hit a sweet spot. And the more I started learning about the brand, once they pulled us on board through Ford's Gin, it's a very, I don't want to say secretive brand. We're not playing hard to get with the allocations. I think the whole genesis of the Whiskey Row series was to basically have a line of more premium whiskeys that never run out of stock, barring a global pandemic or subsequent glass shortage, all that fun stuff. There's a reason I'm wearing a hat, because I'm half bald at this point. This is essentially a brand that has always been very content to sort of sit in the shadows and let people come to it, which is it's a very powerful position to be in. But now that we're in earnest trying to keep up with the Sazeracs and the Beams, not that the Brown family has anything to prove when it comes to American whiskey, we figured it's best to start taking people through sort of a walking drinking tour of the history of the company, using these brands, basically these marks of Old Forester as an example. And as much as I would love to say that the bottle of 1870 that you're about to taste has actual whiskeys from 1870 in it, they don't. And here's the thing, there's been plenty of technological advances that have taken place since then. I don't necessarily know if I'd be champing at the bit to drink a whiskey from 1870. I think it'd be really great for clout. Oh no, we've Jason too soon. It's great for clout, but the amount of technology that is behind Brown-Forman products is very much on par with the consistency and just basically the genuine nature of Old Forester itself. I'm sure we are all pros. I mean, Vadim doesn't hang around with bozos, and I'm assuming we all know we're very much, well, I mean, the good kind of bozos. I mean, he's seen me act plenty bozo like in my days. For those of you that may not know, Brown-Forman is a company that owns a couple of small family-owned labels, Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, you might be familiar. These are the brands that basically keep the lights on for us. But fun fact, Old Forester was the very first brand that essentially started the Brown-Forman Corporation. It is, as of this year, 152 years old. And if anyone's ever gone to walk the Bourbon Trail in Kentucky, every bar you walk into has some Old Forester on the back bar. It is absolute canon when it comes to Kentucky bourbon. And the story of how things started, we're going to start at 1870. Feel free to sip as we go along. I'm all for, if someone wants to raise their hand or interrupt, I'm all for answering questions, please. I'm here for all of that.
So Joe,
1870.
quick question.
Yes.
Love it. Just so we clarify, we're starting with 1870. We're going to go in chronological order, and we'll just sip as we go. Or do you want to walk us through each expression and like tasting those, or how do you prefer to do it?
Let's sip as we go. I mean, tasting is such a subjective thing, and I'd be happy to give you the can sort of tasting notes of it. But it's, we all know the value of tasting in a group. You're going to pick up on more stuff. It's different stuff than I will and whatnot. I just like to think it's like a history lesson we get to filter through our kidneys. So however we want to do that, I am okay with.
Sounds good.
Okay, so here's the thing, 1870. This is, historically speaking, wasn't really a great time for whiskey. There are plenty of people distilling whiskey, and the distilleries, some were cranking out good stuff, others not so much. It's not that much has changed. But a gentleman, a 26-year-old man by the name of George Garvin Brown, realized that there was a huge opportunity to take advantage of in the liquor industry. This man, I say man, I mean, at 26 back then, you're sort of an elder statesman at that point. He was a pharmaceutical salesman. And if we all know what pharmaceuticals were like back then, they're pretty tough, right? I mean, there's laudanum and cocaine and all different manners of heroin and such. And as a result, the government really had to clamp down on some very strict rules. There were zero guardrails for the liquor industry in 1870. The way that it used to work back then, you would have to basically go to a pharmacy or an apothecary with a script for medicinal whiskey, or just to buy something, whatever they were blending themselves. And there was essentially a holding vat that they would have in their back room. And yes, they would have to originally buy from a distillery, but let's say they wanted to kind of improve their margins and they were a little less scrupulous, right? Or unscrupulous. They could fill it up with whatever the heck they wanted. They could top it off with wine, with beer, prune juice, anything. There are these horror stories of them emptying spittoons into it, going off of the school of thought where if it tastes bad, it's got to be good for you. And there was no guarantee that what you were getting was the real McCoy. So this young man, George Garvin Brown, sees his opportunity, and he identified, this is almost prophetic. There's three things that he honed in on that he felt the liquor industry could use, that his brand could use. The first was quality, second was consistency, and third was celebrity. Now bear with me. It's almost like he was coming out with a mezcal in 2022. But hear me out. I'm going to tell you that it sounds like a really weird flex, but it's going to make sense as we go on. We are the world's first bottled bourbon. Again, really weird flex. We are actually, fun fact, we are the second product in history, American product in history, to be put into a glass bottle, the first of which being Heinz ketchup. First is the quality. He knew absolutely nothing about distillation, but he did have relationships, and he was able to be put in touch with three different distilleries around the Louisville area: Atherton, Mattingly, and Melwood, all three of which are currently owned by Brown-Forman. He would basically buy his very first batch. He would buy 7 barrels from each warehouse and would blend it together. And that would sort of be the consistency year in, year out. This was before the Bottled in Bond Act, so you didn't have to produce from a single season with a single distiller. But let's say one distillery had an off season, ideally the other two distilleries, because he went with such quality ones, would be of a certain consistency that it would balance out the batch. And so he wouldn't necessarily have to keep tasting and adjusting as he went along. It would be very consistent, sort of like a set it and forget it type thing by design. Second was, so that was consistency. The second is quality. There was no way to guarantee back then, the way that it was working, there was no way to guarantee the what you were getting was the real deal. So in order to ensure this, he was the very first man. They didn't even have machine seaming of glass back then. So all the glasses, all the bottles he had to purchase were hand blown. It would be a hand blown glass bottle with an Old Forester label on it, with his basically his own signature on the label, sealed at the blending house. I say distiller. I can't say distiller because we weren't distilling at that point yet, but sealed and signed and basically shipped off, saying that what you're getting, I put my name on. And no one had done that yet. I mean, yes, you would have glass bottles and you would have corks you pitted, but again, the pharmacist apothecary would, whatever they would do in the back room, that was sort of their business. Number three was the celebrity. He knew that if you had the celebrity endorsement, you would move significant cases. Again, prophetic, because this is kind of how the world works these days. It's, it took Zsa Zsa Gabor and Woody Allen to sell Smirnoff vodka back in the 60s. And I don't even get me started on tequila and mezcal these days, but he actually, because of his background in pharmaceuticals, he was super tight with an old army medic, a doctor by the name of Dr. William Forrester with two R's, Forr. You notice now that we're spelled with one, there's a reason for that. So he was able to bring Dr. William Forrester into the fold and gave him a piece of the pie for as long as he could give his seal of approval, saying this whiskey is good. And I'm a doctor. I mean, how else does Crest sell so much toothpaste? It's saying that 9 out of 10 doctors choose Crest, right? And he knew this in a time where like people were just getting hip to the idea of celebrity pushing cases. So these three things put together, he created Old Forester. Old because it's an aged whiskey, and Forester because that's the doctor's. He's got the doctor's seal of approval, and it went off like a house on fire. And the 1870, for those of you who've already started tasting, this is the flavor profile that we hang our hats on, right? We know that if you smell bananas, it's going to be a Brown-Forman whiskey. That's our yeast. But the 1870, without guiding you too much, I always love to start out by this is the baseline. Does anyone here a classic gamer? Like they used to play like Super Mario Brothers 2 on the Nintendo? Anybody?
Tetris all the way.
Oh, hell yeah. We got to support the home team, right? Super Mario 2, right? 1870 is the Mario of the lineup. He might not jump as high as Luigi. He may not float like the princess. He might not pull stuff up as quick as Toad, but his name is on the box. This is 100% the distillery profile that we go for. It's the Goldilocks bottle. It's the everyday drinker. Orange zest, vanilla bean, mint leaf. It's basically like Old Forester 86 proof, a couple tax brackets north. Again, very easy, and we bottled it at 90 proof because that was the original proof at which Old Forester was bottled, and it's what created the Brown legacy at a time where there were very few rules about liquor production and marketing and all that. Going through all the questions, I see there's two questions right here. What do they put in everything in 4 glass bottles? It was clay jugs. It was the amphora essentially, and they're very easily broken. And you absolutely had to use oak barrels to age back then. It's American white oak is the only one that really is able to swell to keep liquid in the barrel. There's all the other types of oak that don't have that tylose in it that really swells to seal the cracks. But yes, he would use oak.
So how does this compare to your regular 90, 86 and 100 proof bourbons?
So you'll notice, I mean, 1870 is not technically an age statement. None of our whiskeys except the birthday bourbon have an age statement on them. That's because Old Forester, I think, and I very much agree with this methodology. We choose our whiskeys based off of flavor profile. I have tasted countless whiskeys that are ready to go at 4 years of age. And I've tasted some 8 years that are still needing a couple more years in there to really come to a true depth. There's no, I mean, we all know that barrel aging is just chaos theory that we can drink. So the way that this holds up, I will say the Whiskey Row, because it's a more expensive bottle. I mean, not that price dictates quality, but if the 86 proof and the 100 proof, the standard sort of Old Foresters are between 4 to 5 years of age, I think this one probably has a bit more of the 6-year ceiling in the blend, a bit more depth to that. For those of you that do not know, we also, we'll talk about the mash bill and heat cycling and everything, but I'll get the heat cycling out of there right now. For those of you that don't know, heat cycling is the means of using heat that's usually a secondary function of the fermentation and distillation, all the heat produced from there, to keep the rick houses warm through the colder months. We all know that as heat causes things to expand, and as whenever there's expansion in the wood of the barrel, there's more interaction between the whiskey and the air through the wood, and so you leach out all those wonderful flavors and aromas and characteristics and whatnot by keeping it warm through the colder months, rather than have to sit there for a couple of the winter months while it doesn't interact that much. By keeping it warm, it's safe to assume that any barrel that's been aged in a heat cycled warehouse will gain 4 to 5 months more of age, traditional age, per calendar year. So I can tell you that the Old Forester 86 proof is a 4 to 5 year blend, but it does not taste like one. We're very confident in that. It definitely punches above its weight when it comes to age. This is usually where I ask if this is everyone's favorite whiskey so far, but it's sort of a stupid joke and no one ever laughs. So we'll move on to the next one. I'd mentioned the Bottled in Bond Act. In 1897, Vadim, am I allowed to curse? In 1897, the feds decided that America had to get its shit together when it came to distillation and production. And
Joe,
yes,
Vadim just said, "Fuck yeah."
Fuck yes, my guy. This is why I'm here. In 1897, the feds had to intervene. There was so much malarkey happening. Not so much with bootlegging. We'll save that for another era. But they decided there's enough money on the table within the liquor industry, and it was enough of a commodity that they had to ensure quality and consistency. Again, nothing that we hadn't already been doing for years at this point. But he saw it coming. But at this point, George Garvin Brown is very much on his way to being has reached whiskey demigod status. And does anyone know the 4 rules of the Bottled in Bond Act? Just for those of you that don't, number 1, this is basically what the feds did. Number 1, the whiskey, in order to have a bottled in bond labeling, or basically that word on the label, that is proof that number 1, you are a whiskey distilled from a single distillery in a single distilling season. Generally, most distilleries will have 2 seasons per year, winter and summer. Number 2, it has to be aged 4 years. It can be above that, but 4 years is the benchmark. Number 3, has to be bottled at 100 proof exactly. But the most important one, number 4, is that all of the aging has to be done in a warehouse that is bonded to the US federal government. So basically, if there's 2 padlocks on the front gate, you've got the key to one and the Fed's got the key to the other. It's the only way to ensure there is no funny business happening. George Garvin Brown did not like this. It meant that he had to actually start spending a little more money on getting those bonded licenses and such. But most importantly, it means they could no longer just blend, because it had to be a product that they distilled themselves. So with the money that he had amassed at that point, he finally bought one of those 3 warehouses that he was originally sourcing from. I believe it was Mattingly. I need to figure that one out for the story. I got to ask someone who's better at this than me. He basically buys the distillery and determines their mash bill, finds his yeast and everything else, and thus became Old Forester. The last thing that happened was that the Forester family unfortunately, very unwisely sold their shares. The doctor had passed and the kids didn't want anything to do with it. Could you imagine if they had seen how it grew now? It's a bit of a, hopefully they didn't live long enough to see how much money they could have made by staying in the game. But because George Garvin Brown was a man of honor, he wanted to sort of signify the passing of the torch. And this was when he dropped that first R, the second R rather, in Old Forester, becoming regular Old Forester. So this is a tip of our hat to that moment in time at 100 proof. And it also celebrates the mash bill. The one thing I didn't say about this, every single whiskey that you were tasting is the exact same mash bill. The Old Forester mash bill is as follows. It's 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% malted barley. That is it. Every single one you taste. And is anyone noticing a bit of a different character off of the 1897? It's not just the difference in proof, right? Obviously, it's a little more giggles per bottle at 100 proof, but I get so much more black pepper off of this. It almost skews rye-ish. It's so lively on the palate. Whereas the 1870 is so sweet and round and rich. The 1897 is very, it's definitely very, I don't want to say fiery because it doesn't hurt me, but I would put this in a Vieux Carré. I would put this in the Manhattan. It's as a sipper, it's great, but it belongs in a cocktail for my palate. Maybe it's different for you all. Is anyone getting a lot of those more sort of jumpier notes? Like I get a lot of coffee on this. Bueller.
I don't really get any coffee. I'm looking for it because I like coffee, but I agree with you. It's definitely it's got a little more spice going on. It's also bigger, bolder with a thicker mouthfeel. So I like that. That's pretty gross sounding now that I say it out loud, but I really like the 1897. It's one of my favorites.
Well, your background is one of my favorites.
I think it definitely has a darkness, a woodiness, I don't know, a char, richness. I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it's delicious, but it's bold for sure.
I like it because there's something about it really coating the whole mouth. It's the finish. I'm not going to say the finish is short. It's not quick, but it's definitely a lot shorter than the 1870. Like the 1870 is almost like it's like a hard candy on the palate afterwards. But this is great. It just lets you know it's there and then goes on to the next sip. So that was essentially 1897. And moving through the turn of the century, the company continues to grow. We continue to buy more and more distilleries now that we have sort of our game plan. And again, this was before Jack Daniels or anything. I think we had purchased Early Times at this point, but we were still basically producing Old Forester. That was our singular offering. We had the 90 proof and we had the bonded. Come 1910, we're taking a huge temporal leap. A very bad thing happens. It is the first time in recorded history that Old Forester production line is temporarily halted. It has only happened twice in all of history, but this first time, 1910, was because the bottling line caught on fire. Now, for those of you that don't know, the way the bottling lines work is once the barrel's ready to go, they empty it out in the trench, they filter all the sediment, all the charcoal and such, and then it makes it into this massive holding tank. And within that day, it's emptied into bottles on the line. So we were sitting on just this mother load of Old Forester in this wooden tank, and the fire happens, and we couldn't pour it out anywhere. You certainly can't pour it back into the old barrels because then it would stop being bourbon. But you can't pour it out because the line is totally demolished. So it just sits there for a couple of months. And what happens, the longer whiskey is sitting in an oaken cask, the interaction continues, more color is leached out, more flavors, more everything else. And so by the time that they finally rebuild it and they're able to pour it out, it is totally not Old Forester. It doesn't look like it. If you still have some of the you haven't got to the 1920 yet, if you still have some of the 1870 or 1897, if you look at it, the 1910 is darker. That's because this is our double-barreled whiskey as a means to sort of tip of our fedora to that moment in time. And we couldn't sell it as Old Forester because George Garvin Brown, who was still alive at this point, was very committed to the consistency. He instead slapped a sticker on it that said Old Fine Whiskey. Now, obviously it's sold out because Old Forester whiskey is delicious. But this one, because it's seen as secondary aging in barrels that have been charred to almost the point of unusability. It is so well beyond alligator char. It's barely viable. And because of that, for 7 to 9 months in these essentially glorified Brita filters, you're getting a little bit of, you're getting a lot more tannins, I should say, a lot more finesse. There is a lot more of that passive filtration with all the charcoal in there. This one, to me, I would want to pour over Bananas Foster. And this as a sipper by itself, I mean, it's not necessarily chocolatey. It smells like it would be very sweet. It's more like cocoa. But the smell, like the nose of it belies the palate in the sense that you think it's going to be a sugar bomb, but the amount of tannins behind that, it's dry as a bone on the finish. And that's the one thing I really appreciate about it. Aside from wanting to just drink half a bottle of it for dessert. It's still great in cocktails. This is more of the old fashioned sipper for me, just because of all of the caramel and the cacao and all of these wonderful desserty notes. And there is still a little bit of that banana. I see Jane just posted about the Bananas Foster. There's always going to be that nose of banana in brown foreign whiskeys. It's most evident in Jack Daniels. I mean, it really does smell like banana runts. Not that there's anything wrong with banana runts. I just prefer to eat the strawberries first. But again, this is a great example of sort of the fruitier, more toffee-driven notes that a bourbon can get to. And again, totally identical mash bill. Vadim, some of us are tasting the rye today, right?
Yep.
Tonight?
Yep.
Yeah. The rye is the only, the rye is a separate mash bill from regular Old Forester. We'll get to that when the time comes, but this is just a fun little jaunt into the world of double-barreled bourbons. And this is the first one that would always, that always sold out pretty consistently, even before the world blew up. So I was just going to ask, this tall poor dude said this, but show of hands as to who prefers the 1910 overall right now. This is usually the point of the tasting where everyone's like, they just sort of like lean back and like, this is not that hopefully you were enjoying yourself before this, but now that it's like really hit the bloodstream, you got that nice flavor. This is what I love because it just opens the door for what you're about to taste in the 1920. Oh, the second time, the only other time in history that we've had to stop production was 10 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Basically, at the kickoff of World War II, we shut down our stills to produce industrial grade alcohol for the war effort. It was predominantly gunpowder, rubber, and nylon production. But again, as we're coming up on the Prohibition bottle, the question usually is, so like, how on earth were we still operating? Like, did we go rogue during Prohibition? Well, do you remember when I was talking about how George Garvin Brown's background is in the pharmaceutical industry? He saw what the temperance movement was doing. His eyes were wide open when they passed the Volstead Act in 1919. So that when 1920, when they finally passed it, when Prohibition hit, he already had a plan. And he was one of 6 distilleries that were allowed, that had government permission to produce medicinal whiskey through Prohibition. The only other distillery of note is Stitzel Distillery before they had to combine with Weller Distillery to stay afloat. But the other 4 were basically all just dust and bones. But we were one of 6 that were allowed to continually operate through Prohibition to produce medicinal whiskey. Can you imagine how many people got like a stubbed toe or depression? Because alcohol is a great way to fix that. You imagine how many people sort of went to their shrink and were like, Doc, I really need the good stuff. But moving on to Prohibition, so the 1920, this was actually something that was added when we first released the Whiskey Row. It stopped at 1910, I believe. And bartenders wanted something that was super unapologetic, but not rude, because some of us like that in a whiskey. I certainly do. I think that the 1920 is so completely thorough. I think it hits the point that all the last 3 is sort of like the one ring of the Whiskey Row series. And all it essentially is our love letter to what we considered was barrel strength back in the day. As there was evaporation of water, or rather evaporation of alcohol through the barrel, there was also evaporation of water. And so most often, if you put liquid in the barrel at 100 proof, after 4 to 6 years, by the time it came out, it would probably be a little closer to 115 proof. So that's kind of why we put the proof at 1920 there. And I always like to joke, it doesn't burn until it gets past security, like right there. But again, the 1920, it is absolutely acrobatic with its applications. It's great in sours. It's great by itself. It's great as a sidecar. If you want, like, it's great in a Boilermaker rather. It's great in really anything you could think to put it in. But I always love tasting barrel proof spirits. I think it's a great way. I think it's a big flex from the distillery. Basically, they're so confident in how good it tastes that they're essentially sending you like an unretouched photograph of something really beautiful. They're that confident that the source material is as good. Think about, like, adding water sort of really helps. It's like adding cream to a cocktail. It's a great way to sort of cover up issues or any sort of flaws that might be there. But anything, the higher the proof, the easier it is to spot the flaw. And I can't spot one with the 1920. I think it's wonderfully complex. It keeps going. And yeah, it's definitely one that would have me falling upstairs if I lived in a 2-story house. I would say the 1920 and the 1870 are my two favorite. I think it's very easy and very complex. I mean, both accessible, but again, those are my two moods: mellow and really wanting to get into trouble. Show of
It's
hands.
very interesting with the Whiskey Row series that they're all pretty much priced around the same price point, within $10 of each other.
Within $5. It's actually, I think the 1910 and 1920 are only like $3 apart. I believe, I don't know what the store pricing is, but because I mostly work in bars and restaurants, but the 1870 starts at around $35 and it makes its way up to like $53 for the 1920. So again, I understand that there are other brands out there that play hardball with allocations, and I get it. It's a business model. It works for it's a great way to sort of drum up the secondary market hype. But I will never agree that the best bottle of whiskey is one that you either have to break the bank to buy or are never able to find in stock. I think the best bottle of whiskey is the one that's in front of you, as long as you're, shopping around. Well, I'm not saying like, the next celebrity whiskey is going to be, remember Virginia Black, everyone? Remember that one in that perfume bottle that was like aged -2 years? Not all whiskey is born equal, but
If anyone thought Drake's whiskey was going to be good, another thing coming.
well, the best part was he didn't even like it. He was drinking Henny on stage. That was the best part. The dude couldn't even be bothered drinking his own product. Anyways, the reason why Whiskey Row is so important to Old Forester is that it's very much in line with the original belief that obviously we want to make sure there's nothing finer in the market. That's like the marketing speak that I'm obliged to repeat, but also that we have a commitment to consistency that is unrivaled. Has anyone ever been to the Lost Spirits distillery in Los Angeles? They've since relocated to Vegas. That man is an evil genius. He's an absolute wizard when it comes to sonication and all the crazy stuff. And I'm trying to get in touch with him to see if he can get this on paper, because he, like the rest of us, he's very much a fan of vintage spirits. And he says out of every American whiskey producer he's ever tried, from 40s, even, pre-war, but like 40s through, current day, Old Forester is the only brand that tastes the same. And we spend a lot of money. We have 7 quality checkpoints from the moment the grain is offloaded from the truck. If there's even so much as one weevil on board, they load it back up and the truck drives down the street to basically take it to the next distillery, who are happy to take what they got. From that moment to the second, it's the final proofing check, but right before cutting and bottling, we have more quality checks in the birth of our whiskey in the maturation of our whiskey than any other brand. That's not to say that there's any other brand, no other brands make good whiskeys, but we all make choices, right? Life's about making choices. And the choice that George Garvin Brown made is really what conducts this whiskey, in that it is incredibly consistent. And the goal is with Whiskey Row, obviously, that it's never going to be out of stock and it's always going to be within reach of one's wallet, and therefore is the right whiskey for the right moment.
And the question earlier was, just to reiterate, Clayton asked, they're all the same mash bill. And so how the different profiles are, like the 1910 has an extra aging in a supercharged barrel, so it's double barreled really. And then the 1920 like is just higher proof and a little older. Okay.
Not even a little older. I mean, they're all basically the same. We're not. That's why. I think at some point we realized that there's really no point in being married to an age statement if the flavor profile is really what matters most. Like, I think it's more effort to make a 12-year whiskey taste the same year to year rather than just having that standard sort of flavor profile. And we have legions of tasters that are just, I mean, talk about a great job they have. Their job to drink like one of the best American whiskeys all day. And Chris Morris is still the master distiller. Jackie was our master taster. We just hired a new taster. I haven't met her yet. She sounds absolutely awesome. Between it all comes from him. And then the trickle down is we have all these wonderful, fun little things to try. Since the Whiskey Row lineup came, there's something else I was going to say, but I totally spaced on it. No, it's not coming to me. I totally lost it. It lost in the ether of the internet. Who's got a question? No is also an acceptable answer. We can move on to the other.
The expressions definitely do taste different, interestingly enough. Same mash bill, same age, but just they do taste different.
I remember it now. I remember it. I mean, if anyone's been lucky enough to go on distillery tours where you actually get to tap barrels and taste them, I had said before that barrel aging of spirits is real chaos theory at work, and that you can have 3 barrels that are hewn, the staves are hewn from the exact same tree, processed in the same mill, assembled in, by the same coopers, filled with the same day's whiskey production, put in the same floor, in the same rick house, right? And then they'll pour them out, and one's the cherry bomb, one's like a butterscotch tannic, black tea thing, and the others, God knows what else. The complexity and just the total random nature of what can come out of that wood. You would think that scientists or botanists would have figured out a way to sort of breed trees to, like, oh, this one's a cherry oak tree, or this one's gonna add the coffee component. It's still insanely random. And so combining them, assigning flavor profiles, and just having all these barrels produced, year in and year out, and assigning them to different expressions, I think is a lot more effective in the long run, rather than being beholden to, like, well, this is what a 12-year used to taste like. Everything, the only constant is change, right?
I was going to ask for the 1910 for the charred barrels. What's your process for charring those barrels now? Obviously, you can't set the distillery on fire every time you go on a run. But what's the process for charring the barrels now?
Whatever. Essentially, I mean, it's because it's still bourbon. They have to be new barrels. My guess is that there were barrels that maybe had like a slight flaw or something. I mean, the largest commodity that Brown-Forman owns is Jack Daniel's. The second largest commodity are their barrels. I think it's some crazy statistic, like 1 in every 4 barrels on Earth is a Jack Daniel's barrel. And that you can take that to the bank. Like, it's absolutely insane. And so my guess is that what they've done with their barrels, maybe the toasting didn't turn out the way that they want it to. They're not going to make their nut on that particular barrel. So why not just take it down to the studs, essentially, like burn it to the point where you get so much caramelization of those sugars and so much, wouldn't have been viable for any other expression. And maybe if the 1910, the base whiskey of the 1910 was passable, maybe it's just the 86 proof. It's just good, simple whiskey, but with that secondary aging, it gets totally put in a different direction. And the 93 proof has no historical significance. It's really just the proof at which it tasted best at. I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did. I'm starting the whiskey's definitely hit my bloodstream right now, so I might be rambling.
Close enough.
Close enough for jazz, right? As far as, they are proprietary with a lot of the stuff. They do not tell us what their method is for toasting of the staves. I know that it is a technology they bought along with Sonoma Cutrer, and the fact that a winery taught us how to make a better barrel that's hilarious. I'm sure it got stuck in plenty of bourbon drinkers' craws, but if it makes a better product, I'm sure they're not going to tell me, because I'm the guy to ask all the questions on the tour, but like, I don't want to ask too many questions. I don't want to get kicked off the tour. Statesman. Sorry.
I had a question. Do you know if they use a cooperage, or do you guys have an in-house cooperage?
Good to see you again, Clayton. The two cooperages we use, one of which is maybe a 10-minute drive from the old Forester Distillery in downtown. By the way, we are the only currently operating distillery in downtown Louisville. Most of our production is in an industrial facility outside of town. We have two cooperages in America. One is the Brown-Forman cooperages. The Brown-Forman cooperage, it produces 2,500 barrels a day. And the second cooperage is out somewhere in Alabama, and it produces barrels only for Jack Daniels, to give you an idea of how massive Jack is relative to the rest of the Brown-Forman whiskeys. But yeah, two cooperages. And I believe the Brown-Forman cooperage is the biggest. There are maybe two other cooperages in the nation, but we are very much the resource for barrels. Quality standard like ISO 9001. You need to explain that to me. I know that because Brown-Forman is incredibly conservative. They're not. I'm not talking politically. It's just they're very risk averse. I'm pretty sure with all their testing comes some sort of quality standard, but I don't know what this applies to which industry.
Yeah, thank you. But it's wide range. But since you're so quality oriented, I was wondering if you followed that. So I was just interested because I'm a quality person in my manufacturing company, and it's a very strict policy. It goes to any industry, really. Very strict. So I was wondering if you followed that. No problem.
I could. It's a great question. I don't know for sure, but if I were to posit a guess, I would say that they have so much riding on the line with Jack Daniels. I think a lot of people really love to take not the good kind of shots of Jack. They like to take shots at Jack because, the higher up the tree, the more exposed you are, I guess.
Exactly. And if you have a consistent product, ISO is definitely focused on quality, consistency, getting the same product, producing it every single time.
I know that they literally cannot afford to make a mistake when it comes to Jack. And because I know the company and I know the people that work for the company and who conduct the company, there's no reason I wouldn't see them applying those same standards to every single one of their whiskeys.
Yeah, wouldn't surprise me.
I assume it might be different for like with Irish whiskey, Slane, Ford's, our gin, Finlandia, the vodka. Like there's plenty of others that maybe aren't kept to as stringent a standard. Maybe they don't need to be as much. I think American whiskey is a really special category in that sense.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a good question. I know that Brown-Forman is a fraction of the size of Beam Suntory, and Beam Suntory carries 26% of our national or like domestic whiskey. We are a fraction of their size and we control 24%. So talk about another brand that punches above its weight. Brown-Forman very much takes the whiskey seriously.
Joseph, where are we tasting from here? Statesman, where are we going?
Statesman, definitely Statesman. Sorry, I kind of got lost in the corn maze. Statesman
good.
was Statesman was actually so Statesman was released to coincide with that movie, The Golden Circle, the Kingsman 2. Right, and it was. I like to joke about how the finish is a lot longer than how popular the movie was. It was a good movie actually, but this was sort of like the American branch of this spy agency, and it was a partnership that I don't think they were really thinking anything would come of it, but they loved Old Forester, and these are basically all the barrels have been sourced from the highest point of the rick houses. Now the batches, the one thing I forgot to talk about was batch size. I think that the naming something small batch is very misleading. I think there's plenty of brands out there that have made their nut saying that they're small batch, right, or distilled by hand or handmade, whatever. But I know that our batch size is anywhere between 95 to 100 barrels per production. So it's definitely smaller relative to the production of regular Old Forester. But they've essentially, the Kingsman was something we didn't think would stick around for long enough, but people really started digging it. So we kept it, and it's about 95 to 100 barrels per production. Again, very bold. It's 90 proof, right? They don't let me sort of carry it around anymore because it's not technically, it's sort of like Whiskey Row, like, greenhouse, or like, the mud room, but it's still a very enjoyable whiskey.
It's 95.
95. Okay. So it's definitely, it's unapologetic. Again, not rude. Oh, that's my cat.
That's amazing.
She wants to get on the action. Magic.
Awesome.
Out of here. Shoot.
You can say
But
that
yeah,
to a cat.
well, she knows what I really mean. Here, I'll show everyone. Oh, I'll show everyone.
Yes. Best part of the night.
She likes whiskey. She's a little shy around guests, though. Yeah, no, she's gone. Basically, yeah, the Statesman. I mean, there's not much I can say about it. It's typical Old Forester stuff. And again, I don't know. I know that there's no sense talking about a higher floor of aging if the warehouse is already heat cycled. So the sort of the fuzzy line between marketing and what's actually going on, I know it's between you and me and whoever's going to watch this recording. My guess is that it's just another flavor profile that we assigned. I think someone had mentioned, Stephen had mentioned minty menthol. That's very much one of the characteristics as well. If anyone has a chance to get the King Ranch one that just released, apparently it's only in Texas, but it's basically filtered through King Ranch mesquite charcoal. And it's also very sort of minty mentholated as well. It's a real pleasure sipper.
I've got a bottle waiting for me in Dallas at Thanksgiving.
You got to send notes, man. They won't even give me a bottle. I'm dying to try it. I work for the damn company.
So the website says the Old Forester Statesman offers bold flavors blended to a smooth 95 proof, hand selected casks, blah blah, warmest places in the warehouse. So that
any
top
description
fours.
that uses the S word, the dreaded smooth, I'm sort of reluctant to follow that into battle.
So
Tastes good.
I was gonna ask about the batching. Like, what can you tell us about like how they do the batching? Is there any kind of I have a bottle of Statesman somewhere, but I can't remember. Are there any kind of like batch numbers on the bottle or anything like that?
No, I believe with our single barrels, those are essentially the single barrel expression. Some of you will be tasting that tonight as well. Once they start releasing an everyday single barrel, it's going to be a true single barrel, and those will be numbered. Those are probably going to be extremely limited. They'll earmark a couple of barrels at a time, and it will have the full information as far as the which warehouse, what floor, I don't know if they're going to go so far as to list the actual barrel number, but most people are pretty happy with the warehouse number and the floor. If you see one that says warehouse K, that was Jackie's favorite warehouse. There's like really cool, weird stuff that happens on K. I think it might have to do with the airflow, but again, it's all within the Old Forester zip code. So it's not like, I wish there was some wonderful bourbon, clandestine bourbon secret to share with you all, but it's really just, there's been some barrel samples I've tasted from Warehouse K that have kind of fallen a little flat. So, again, more of that chaos theory thing. But as far as the blending, I mean, it's, we cut with reverse osmosis water like everyone else. And, we have, teams of like a 20 person team of tasters that are constantly reviewing, making sure that there's consistency from batch to batch. That's
It's almost kind of like the opacity is part of the brand. It's like, Old Forester, trust us, we know what we're doing.
Yeah, but like every American whiskey company kind of does that, right? If there's and to be fair, there's Discus, like the Distilled Spirits Council that George Garvin Brown started. That's sort of like the USBG of distillers. Not that I really hold too much love for the USBG, but it's basically just an association of all these producers being like, all right, this is our uniform standard. And I understand they got to run a business and they've got to keep some things, hush hush, but as long as it tastes good and, there's no like federal trial pending because of how we've mislabeled our whiskey or we've misled our consumers. Remember what happened with Templeton way back when? Delicious MGP whiskey. And they were trying to say it was like, oh, small batch, like blah, 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 used to make, and someone really put their feet to the fire for it. And they had to basically offer a $5 refund on every barrel or every bottle they had sold. Lost a shit ton of money.
So this one actually tastes really great. And I think for me, the palate on this is kind of somewhere between 1910 and 1920. Interestingly enough.
It's funny because you told me you were going to be sending that along, and I looked in my collection. I have plenty of Old Forester. That's one that I do not have. I remember enjoying it, but I think people are so quick to write off like those one-off bottles, like, oh, it's after that movie, like whatever. It sort of came and went like a fart in the wind tunnel. But the whiskey is actually stuck around, which is nice.
Well, because apparently Brown-Forman as a brand overall had signed some kind of deal with the movie because there's a GlenDronach Kingsman as well. That's also kind of part of that whole universe. And that's a ridiculous dram.
Yeah. Have you tasted it? It's 35 year or something insane.
So John Debney pulled out a bottle last time we had a tasting at his house. And after we killed his bottle of Grandeur during the bottle share, after most people left, he pulled out the Kingsman and opened it and shared with everyone.
I had a sip of it for the first time when I was in Louisville for a barrel selection trip, and I was 3 sheets, and I could still acknowledge there was so much sherry in it. Like the sherry notes of GlenDronach are really what put it on the map, and it was like a sherry candy. It was so good. And I don't remember much. There's photographic evidence of me having had a good time, but that's kind of where it stops.
For sure. We took a poll earlier for everyone's favorite
Henry
of the whiskey row. Do you want to guess what the favorite was?
I'm gonna guess 1920.
Damn, you knew right off the bat. 50% voted 1920.
Listen, I've done a few of these tastings. It's every single time. This is absolutely, there's like the closest is always the 1870 or the 1897. That's usually like one of them is usually left off the podium. But between the 1920 is always on top. It's so thorough.
Interesting. Yeah, there's 50% 1920, 32% 1910. I remember loving the 1910 last time we did this, and
Okay.
it was my favorite this time again.
You get too big?
Sorry?
Yeah.
That probably wasn't for us. All good. But yeah, 1910 was a hit last time. It's good for me, but the bourbon drinkers want more punch. So the 1920 delivers.
Right. A little more slap than tickle.
Where should we go from here?
We just did the Statesman, and that was great.
Mhm.
I think our last one in the actual official lineup is going to be the cast strength single barrel of bourbon, selected by Mission. So when we were sending these out, I wanted to make sure everybody had the same one so that everybody had similar tasting notes. And thanks to Shane, it was either going to be the K&L bottling or the Mission bottling, and we flipped a coin and went with Mission. They were both limited to one per person, and he let me take his bottle for this. So if you like it, thanks to Shane. If you hate it, it's Shane's fault. I wanted to do K&L.
It's always my fault, man. Come on. We know this.
I appreciate you either way, Shane.
So the
Right
way
on.
that the way that single barrels are working now is the majority of the ones that are available in the market are barrels that venues have chosen. Over the next, like, we're still building up our inventory. It's going to probably be another 2 years before we will have ample product to basically release an everyday single barrel, one that you do not need to. I mean, K&L and Mission, they have such buying power, right? The only way you can end up with a bottle of these is you got another buyer. You call up David OG and be like, hey, put me on the list next time you drop a barrel, because they sell out within like 17 minutes. It's insane. I mean, the thirst for, especially when the barrel proof came out, because when we first started doing single barrels, it was only 90 proof. And then the barrel strength is so intense. It is the first time you pop the bottle, the flocculation that happens, it almost coats, it like almost hazes over the entire glass. There's so much volatility in it, like it's still settling. And yes, like Michael was saying about the barrel proof rye, it is super coveted. And they had no idea how well the rye would do when it came out, and they were so off in their predictions that we have basically been instructed to stop selling rye because we cannot hold it in stock for more than 2 months at a time. It just evaporates. Are we tasting the sorry?
I was just gonna tell you too that the single barrel strength K&L last time they put it out, I think it was like less than 2 minutes that it sold out on website. So that it's ridiculous how popular it is.
I had to win his Instagram live raffle for the opportunity to win one. Yeah. To get one. And then I had to give mine up to Shane. So there's that.
I mean, I work for the damn company, and they sent me 0 samples. They'll send me samples left and right of the birthday bourbon, but they will not. I had to barter for a bottle of the single barrel rye.
That said, I forgot, as we were entering our last official pour, I invite everyone to turn on their cameras and raise a glass for just a second. As we say thank you to Joe for spending the evening with us, and thank you to you all for being here tonight. Give it a second, let everybody jump on. There we go. Carrie, tall poor dude. Ken, let's go. All right, everyone, raise a glass. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you to Old Forester. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, y'all.
Got it.
Delicious.
I've tasted all of the K&L single barrel. I've got a bunch up here that I've not as of yet cracked, but it's hard to find a stinker. Like, they're, especially when you've got, the pallets at Mission, they know what they're doing. And I do know that once you pass the threshold, don't quote me on this, but if when it's your time, the queue at this point for a barrel is anywhere between 9 and 12 months. Like, it's insane. But if they look at your barrel requests and they realize you've purchased 7 barrels already, there's a good chance you'll get some pretty special barrels in there. They tend, much like the whole company, they reward loyalty. It's not to say that your first barrel is going to be, whatever they could scrape up off the distillery floor, but because you can still get a couple of, flat samples. The tricky thing about ordering, and I've done this plenty of times with these single barrel trips, it changes so much with the barrel proof because there's so little water in it that even just the slightest oxidization can totally change the character. So granted, it's even less because they don't even have to cut it. But by the time you taste this, when you taste the sample, you make your pick. By the time it arrives to you, it's almost changed character. I'm not going to say entirely, but it's changed enough that you're like, oh, wow, I don't remember it tasting like this. And then eventually it mellows out. But taste is a very weird, subjective thing. So Michael, you have a note here, the candied sugar, confectioner's sugar. For anyone that has the birthday bourbon from this year, I get so much confectioner's sugar and like marzipan off of it. That's another thing that can show up in a really elegant whiskey.
This poll is not going to be fair, but I'm going to toss it out anyway. Man, this pick is good.
I'm still going to vote for the 1920 because I haven't tasted the single barrel from Mission, but we'll hold that torch. The rye, I don't know if anyone is anyone tasting the rye tonight? Is that one of the sort of?
Yeah, about half the people should have a sample of the cast strength rye if you want to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that distilleries work, most distilleries, there are very few distilleries back in the day that were built. They were purchased because they all went out of business. And the way that it works is when you buy a distillery, you inherit their cookbooks. And one of the distilleries that Brown-Forman purchased, I believe it may have been Shively, where they moved early times to eventually. They inherited this one recipe called Old Normandy Rye. And it was 65 rye, 25 malt, 10 corn. And maybe I'm hearing different things about it in my I think it may be 15 corn, but it's, again, for a Kentucky rye, it's pretty close to the colonial style, right? It doesn't have that like farina sort of like cooked breakfast cereal flavor that like Old Overholt does, like all those like old like Monongahela Valley kind of ryes, but it's actually a rye that's anyone follows Fred Minnick. He actually didn't have anything nice to say about this, which is really surprising because he and Jackie were, thick as thieves. But this one is a total cherry bomb for me.
And the cast strength rye, but it's a single cask, right?
Correct. And I had screwed this up at one tasting at 7 Grand San Diego. Someone asked if it's a true single barrel. I said, no, it's just a flavor profile. The first year on the job, it is a true single barrel. But the reason why it's so hard to find is because our rye inventory, they decide on a percentage of barrels they'll rope off for the single barrels. And at this point where the production is relative to total volume, I mean, it's maybe 10 barrels a year. It's as difficult to find as a bottle of King of Kentucky. It'll change, right? I mean, in 3 years we'll have enough, but.
And major thanks to Jazz at El Cerrito for helping me get one of these for us to try tonight. Because this was, like you and I talked about it, there was no way I was going to get a bottle, and he came through last minute. So just wanted to give him a shout out.
Very, very impressive. I think it's delightful. It reminds me of Old Rittenhouse.
So you mentioned the heat cycling in the Rick House, and I'm wondering about, like, you guys distill in downtown, so I imagine you must have Rick houses like all around, right? And have you, like, how does a barrel tasting, like, how does a tasting trip work? Do people do it at the downtown location? And have you like tasted barrels from everywhere, from all the different Rick houses?
It's a good question. The downtown distillery is a fully functional distillery with a fully functional cooperage, but they produce a sliver of what the full production of Old Forester is. The offsite distillery is industrial. There's no tour guides that go through there, right? It's not anything super pretty. It probably looks like a rum distillery from the outside, but all the barrel picks do take place at the downtown distillery. I mean, it really is so geared toward the consumer, and it's fully functional. You walk through, you see the fermenters working, you see the still working. You walk into their rick house, and sure enough, it smells like a rick house. And then you taste the barrel. The way that it usually works is whatever the barrel they earmark for it, you sit there, you drill into it, fill up a glass, and then you hammer what's called a spire into it. It's made out of cypress, I think, or spruce, something. Or it's not oak, because the spire actually swells up a little better to seal the hole. You cut it down to proof, whatever you choose the proof to be. You taste it, and you make your decision right then and there. It's a lot of heavy lifting, and there are people that are constantly milling through. It's all computer controlled. Like every barrel has a QR code, and every barrel is logged. So it's really just, I'm sure whatever systems they have automatically say like, hey, it's time to taste number 025 FB, right? And like, I'm sure that's part of the automation, and then the rest of it is sort of manual, but it works based off of taste. It's not like, this barrel is going to be ready at, 12 years to this day. It has to be a product of constant continuous tasting. If that answers. Sucks when everyone has a cold though, because it sort of gums up the whole works.
Hey, just curious, what's the mash bill of the rye?
65, it's 65 rye. It's either 20 or 25 malt, and then either 10 or 15 corn.
Thanks.
I've been told 3 separate things, and so it's a little sort of confused in my head. I know for a fact that it's 65% rye, sourced from the European Union, actually a lot from the Dakotas, but there's so much more rye that comes out of Germany and elsewhere that that's where we get most of ours from.
Joseph, I was going to let you know, I was fortunate to come across a friend of mine got the King Ranch, and I was able to get a sample from him. And I know if you can get it, I would though, man. It's definitely unique amongst the profile. It has a ton of rye notes. You might even think it's a rye, like based on some of the notes that you get off of it. But definitely a solid pour. I like it.
Filtration is such a crazy thing, man. Like,
right?
It can reveal so many random things. I almost wish I could taste Jack before they filtered it through the sugar maple charcoal, just to see what is what
You can. They make a gift set that's pre and post. I mean, it's the White Dog pre and post, but it's pre and post, and you can taste them side by side.
It's very interesting.
We've done that with a couple of brands out of Tennessee.
I stand corrected.
So it's possible. I think it's a distillery only, but like, you're within the brand. Reach out and tell them to send you some.
Yeah,
they actually
I try to do that.
It's like a thing. It's like 2 375s next to each other.
And
I tried to do that with the King Ranch, and they shot me down so hard to hurt my feelings.
That's only going to be a Texas release. That's it, huh?
Correct.
Man,
and they're already painfully oversold. There's already accounts that are bugging out because they didn't get what was promised. No one's ever fully happy in the whiskey world. There's always going to be someone salty about not getting their allocation, and I get it. Especially something as with the national pride like Texas has. When I say national, statewide.
Well, and that release got a ton of media coverage. Like, it was all over the place, and all of the whiskey groups out here. Everybody was talking about it. So, I mean, it's surprising that it was so hyped. But I mean, that's a lot of our whiskey world, right? Stuff gets hyped, and then it just disappears, immediately.
Well, then you toss King Ranch onto it, which has its own like version of the Ford F-150. Like, it's a big deal down in Texas.
They were one of the original sort of ranches, right? I mean, that sort of was, they were instrumental to the entire defining culture of Texas ranchers.
Yes. Yeah, we take it pretty seriously down there.
It's like if the Texas Rangers released their own line of Spurs or something, you know, like it's guaranteed going to sell out in 2 minutes.
Only if Chuck Norris is involved.
I think his was with Wrangler jeans, extra fabric in the crotch so he could kick higher.
Do you know if Old Forester has ramped up production to try to meet current demands for bourbon?
100%, 100%, and we are still behind the 8 ball. I mean, having to, if we had a crystal ball that could tell us what drinking trends are going to be like in 6 years, we would be fine, right? But the rye is a perfect example that we're like, yeah, we'll try it out. Maybe people like it. People fucking loved it, right? Like rye in a cocktail makes perfect sense. Rye makes perfect sense. Rye's delicious. It just, bourbon was easier to make and tasted a lot better for more palates out there, which is why it's the national spirit. So like they had no idea. And so we have been getting so much crap for not having enough rye in stock, because it's wonderful. It makes a great cocktail and then it's out of stock for 2 months. So Brown-Forman is doing this thing where they're starting to consolidate. I can't speak for their whiskey brands. We sold early times, I think, so that we could utilize the space. I mean, early times as a brand has sort of stopped growing after a while. And I think we're using that space to keep Woodford moving. I mean, Jack is just its own beast. It has its own ecosystem practically. But as far as ramping up Old Forester and Woodford, they're starting to sort of combine a lot of their old production lines in order to lay down more barrels to make more whiskey in 4 to 6 years time. We actually, Pepe Lopez was like a super janky tequila that we used to make, and we didn't even sell the brand. We just discontinued it so that we could convert all those palenques to growing for Herradura and El Jimador. So, it's scalability is always going to be the biggest bottleneck of the whiskey industry. Any aged spirit, you're going to need some sort of crystal ball or some really good economist who knows exactly how much it's gonna you're gonna need in however many years.
The only
Super
question we
janky
haven't talked
tequila.
about is you want to tell us about the latest release of birthday bourbon?
The good old birthday.
Yeah.
So birthday bourbon is the original line extension of Old Forester, and it came out I think in 2002. So we were a little late to the game, but like keep in mind, bourbon through the 60s to the 80s, or even the 90s, bourbon was sort of uninteresting, right? People viewed it as like this stodgy old bottle that would gather dust, and people just cared more about vodka and weird, horrible cocktails that are that contain colors that don't exist in nature, and enough cocaine in your nostrils to not really be able to smell or taste anything. That was kind of how the drinking world worked. So basically birthday bourbon was released and like no one gave a shit. And what it was basically it was released on the birthday of George Garvin Brown, September 2nd. It's a single day's production of only the honey barrels basically that have gathered at that point. And it's the one expression that changes its age statement every year, because it's really just a blend of anywhere from 75. Well, it started out, it was closer to 75 barrels, but now we've had to up it to, I think, over 100 barrels per year. It's basically all of the most elegant, the oldest barrels that we have. I believe this year's release is 11 years. The youngest is 11. It's totally decadent. It's delicate. It's not as assertive. I think if the single barrel is the rock and roll, this is maybe closer to chamber music, something a little more polished. I don't say that like chamber music can be super stodgy, but like again, so elegant. A lot of if anyone's tasted it this year's this one so far, those of you that have it, again, what I was talking about with the marzipan and the powdered sugar, it's like the confectioner's sugar, and it's almost floral. I mean, if all chamber music tasted like this, I would totally be into it. I would quit electronic music tomorrow. But it's interesting because it's more of an abstract concept than a singular flavor profile. And that's why they make such great collector's items, because 3 years ago it was 10 years old. Last year is a 12-year at 52%. This year it's an 11-year at, I believe, 48%. It's whatever it tastes the most interesting, and they let the barrels dictate what the flavor profile is going to be. Whereas King of Kentucky is actually the early times mash bill, and it's, you know, entry level. It has to be 15 years old. I mean, it's like drinking a dictionary of flavor. It's insane. And birthday bourbon is no different. But again, it's for as high foolproof as it is, it's pretty delicate. And it's definitely a sipper. It's a very eye-catching bottle. Sells out again pretty instantaneously. I think Brown-Forman is catching on to the ability of really leveraging supporters with, you know, dangling this wonderful carrot of the birthday. Yeah, the 21 is my favorite so far. I mean, I've been with the company for I think 3 years now, so I've had the pleasure of having tasted 3 separate birthday bourbons side to side, and last year was just legendary. And this one's good too, but again, you know, it's something out there for everyone. There's a lot of I got a lot of black tea in this year's as well. It's just a really nice sipper with like a finish that it will follow you to bed. Even after you brush your teeth, you're still going to taste it. It's like if your brain got a tattoo. But like not an embarrassing one. Oh, King of Kentucky tasting. Could you imagine? God. They released an 18. This is the first year they released 2 King of Kentuckys. One was the 15-year and one was the 18-year. The 15-year, they released about 250 bottles. 18-year, they released something like, I don't know, like 50 bottles for the entire world. I can't even, like, that's not even going to hit the secondary market. You know, what's interesting. I actually have, let me see if I can show you really quick. I do have a bottle of old Cream of Kentucky. Where is it? It's one of the most beautifully embossed bottles. No, can't find it now. We can just see my backside. Nope, can't find it. But was this beautiful embossed bottle with all these like corn stalks in it and such. And then they re-released it recently, right? And it's like what's like a $90 to $120 bottle. It's good. But the original Cream of Kentucky with the heart on the label, straight bourbon is just, I love old bourbon.
So what's the connection between Cream of Kentucky and King of Kentucky?
2 totally different. Totally different brands. Is it, yeah, $3,000? Jeez whiz. But that's the 2020 release. Yeah, that one was real hard to find. Whiskey Caviar. See, but this is also the problem where it's like there's sites like this that really, I mean, the secondary market can really be so predatory, and half the people buying bottles is just for clout. The reason why I love groups like this and people like Vadim is that it's not about the clout. It's like the best tasting parties you'll ever have. I'm going to guess that Whiskey Caviar is just doing that artificial markup nonsense to make them seem like what they have is super special. I'm not saying King of Kentucky isn't good. I'm just saying I've never tasted a bottle that tastes like it's worth $3,000. Maybe I'm a bit more simple in my tastes. Like I'm definitely not a super taster, but paying that much, man. If I could afford it, listen, if it was just like, you know, a day's work, no problem, but it's a lot.
Well, this goes to like a question that I like to ask traditionally, which is like, what is your holy grail bottle? Like what would be worth buku bucks for you?
Bottle of very old Fitzgerald. Something to taste what really came out of Stitzel-Weller when Pappy Van Winkle was the distiller. Like really what defined his flavor profile. Rittenhouse 25-year rye. I mean, coming out of the 90s, the beautiful releases that were coming out because no one gave 2 shits. You know, they basically, you can't sell it. It's going to stay in the barrel. And so like these great whiskeys got so old Like if you Google like a bottle of the Rittenhouse 1925 these days, I think even if it's available, it's up around that price. Elegant, absolutely beautiful. That would be another really nice one. President's Choice is another good one. They release that every now and again. That's when the president of Brown-Forman personally selects a single barrel and gives it to his friends. That'd be a cool one to get. I would be absolutely terrified opening up a $3,000 bottle. Like, what if I tore the cork? I guess we got to drink it, right?
I hear the 150th is really good. And if Carrie's still here, I know she got the pour. One of the guys in the group gave away a sample of it.
I was fortunate enough. I was given a couple bottles of the 150th, and yeah, I mean, it's really the cask strength, incredibly textured, and the depth of flavor. They were going to blend 150 barrels together because they're big on numbers and like verbal alliterations, but they realized there was so much evap off of some of the barrels that like they couldn't get anything out of it. They ended up breaking it up into 3 separate flavor profiles, and it was like around 47 to 48 barrels per profile, totally uncut. And yeah, man, it's just good whiskey. Like, that's what the Brown family's known for. You know, it's not, again, no disrespect to Sazerac, because, you know, Katie, the national ambassador, she's a good friend, and they just play a little more hardball with their allocations. You know, it's a little harder to get the good stuff. And there are some people that, you know, that's sort of the growing consensus that, like, yes, it's good whiskey, but it's not worth the price, or however much, you know, Fireball you got to pour to get those bottles. We're lucky enough to be at that point with Old Forester, where if you support Old Forester, you will get birthday bourbon. You know, it's a bit more cut and dry. And I think we can say that because we're not, you know, Old Forester production is, at one point, Old Forester as a brand was over 1 million cases in the nation. This was 40s, 50s. And then it just dropped down to, I think, 40 to 50,000 cases through the dark ages, like in the 90s. And now last year we just surpassed 370. So it's coming. And hopefully we got enough, you know, racked to handle that. But the expressions like the 150 are always nice to. I have absolutely tried the 1915. It's delightful. It really is. Really good in the Manhattan.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in on that. The 150th, I've got to try a couple pours of that, and I took it and compared, like, took the 1920, took the barrel proof, a bottle that I have that's really good, and then I took the 150th, and definitely, like, the 150th outperformed the other two. I mean, like, 1920 was awesome, barrel strength was next level, and then 150th was even like that much more nuanced. You know, I mean, just a richer depth of flavor, you know, but it's also, you know, you're also going to pay, you know, significantly more for it, you know, it's a special pour, but probably not your, you know, daily thing. So
if that was my daily thing, I'd be like, I don't know.
You'd be working another job.
The Saudi royal family, I'd be driving my like silver plated Audi on carpets, you know, from one mansion to the other.
You'd be lighting
But
your cigars with $100 bills.
There you go. Or I'd figure out a way to set actual Bitcoins on fire, and I'd vape them.
It's fantastic. We need to put that on a t-shirt.
Well, 150th when it came out was like what, $180?
Not even 150 bucks. Get it?
Yeah,
because we loved alliterations. It was $150, but it also happened right at just the deepest depths of lockdown. And the, you know, 3/4 of the venues I'd reached out to were busy scrambling, trying to, you know, figure out how the fuck to stay alive, how to keep their employees working, how to, you know. So just we were actually sitting on inventory for a while, and then once things started easing up, they're like, "Oh, you still have this?" Yes, I would gladly take. It was, I mean, it was less than 50% of my key accounts took their allocations of it because of how rough everything was at that point.
Everybody lucked out getting it at Costco though.
Dude, you sent me that picture of the Costco selling bottles of birthday bourbon for like $120. It's like I understand the theory of the practice of selling bottles to Costco and Trader Joe's. Like you get your depletions up, but like you're over a barrel. You're not making any money on that. You're just making people happy, which again, I have no problem with. But as a business, it's like selling to Canada. Like you have to understand that you're going to be selling at a loss. You're doing it because, you know, tax watershed or something. Oh, Derek, you can follow me, Joe from Ford's. Yeah, nice. Thank you, Clayton. If I ever make the full jump over to Old Forester, though, it's probably going to be Old Faux Joe Bro. I've already seen if it was available. It is. If anyone takes it, I'm going to be super, super hurt.
Hold on,
My
let me
wife
take
is
a look quick.
Canadian and she's very triggered by your slamming it. No, I'm kidding. I don't give a shit.
I'm gonna take that now and then I'll sell it to you later, okay?
Nice. That's good. We'll trade birthday.
Oh, there you go.
You know,
Come on, charge him at least the king of Kentucky, Shane.
Can you talk a little bit about the 117 series?
Yeah. Oh, the 117 so good. Actually, I think I have a bottle of it right there. It was Jackie's first solo project. It was we were touting it as the very first bottle, a Brown-Forman bottle of whiskey that had a woman's signature on it. It was super great. This was going to be her sandbox, right? Like this was her, you know, she was basically in those warehouses every single day, fighting off spiders, like crawling through ricks and such and finding these barrels. And she really developed this knowledge of how Old Forester ages and pitched to Chris, like, what if we do these super limited, 375 ml bottles of just the weird shit, right? And the very first one was of her favorite warehouse K. Oh wait, no, sorry, it was the Angel Share, the high evap barrels, basically the barrels that were almost unusable. She would love them, because it was almost like it would be like all these flavors in a little zip file. And she started collecting those and so pitched it and that was the very first 117. It's basically just all the weird stuff. And I believe we are continuing it, even though she's no longer our master taster. But to this day, it is only available at the distillery. The next one coming up, I believe, is the extra old, like the 1910, with some of the blend, I believe, is spent maybe twice as long, like almost a year and a half in those beyond alligator skin barrels. But they're pretty tight-lipped on all the stuff that's not really available nationwide. I think their very first release, they sent me a case of 24 bottles, and I distributed it to all of my on-premise accounts. It was consumed very quickly, but again, same. It's in the key of Old Forester, but they're very different tunes, and they're very different. We have this one called the Warehouse Fire. Like one of our warehouses caught fire, and the Louisville Fire Brigade came and put it out. And so, as a gesture of thanks, they made a blend off of the barrels that survived the fire and gave it to them, which is pretty cool.
So on that note, speaking of different series, there's the presidential, and when I was out in Kentucky, we got to try it at the distillery in Louisville. And is that something that's like, what does availability look like? That is that?
It's according to the whim of the president of the Brown-Forman company. It's whenever they feel like something special is coming up, like a state dinner or something, an unexpected gesture, maybe someday, hopefully they will select a barrel that like they absolutely love, and they'll have the presidential seal on it, the circular label, very, very unique. They're impossible to find outside of Kentucky. It really is something for the executive level. My guess is it's just another barrel proof single barrel, just something that's truly special, above and beyond the regular single barrel deliciousness.
Yeah, we had a couple flights, and definitely the presidential series were pretty special. So I was like hopeful that maybe it would be somewhere outside of Kentucky, but oh well.
It's King of Kentucky. You're going to start to see it pop up in other markets. I think they might have sold a couple bottles to California this year, or maybe coming up next year. President's Choice is totally at the discretion of the company. I've never seen, and they've never, of all the meetings that we've had, it's never been brought up. Oh, let me get my other cat.
Right on. Well, thanks for the info. It gives us a little bit more, more insight into the deal with that, because we saw them available on a flight. We're like, oh man, I got to try it, and they were definitely solid. So curious if they were available anywhere. So thank you.
My goal is to be with a company long enough that, with every year I learn more and more details about Old Forester specifically. And if I could spend the rest of my days selling Old Forester and Ford's gin, I would be a pig in shit. I genuinely like two of my favorite brands out there. I hope the more I get to work with it, the more I get to know, the more, like, I haven't even seen the industrial Old Forester distillery yet. Drank plenty of the bourbon, but I like it because it makes these more interesting. Coming up as a bartender, you could always tell who was coming at these tastings from like a marketing or sales background and who like really is into it. And I've always been a fan of the latter. And that's kind of what I strive to be. Like, this is no different than all of us sitting around like a table in a boisterous bar, just like nerding the fuck out about whiskey. You're like, yes, oh my God, this is so good. That's
You're at the right place, at least for tonight, for sure.
That's what it feels like, man. It's pretty great.
Any other Old Forester questions? Do you want to take a stab at guessing what the favorite pour of the night was?
I'm going to guess it's a single barrel.
I'm sharing the results. You'd be happy to know 1920 took it.
My guy.
46% voted 1920, 32% voted single barrel bourbon, and then 21% Statesman. Wow, Statesman really brought it. Sweeped all of the other ones. That's crazy.
Yeah, look at that. Jesus. 1910's not used to being off the podium. That's pretty great.
That's what I was saying. Is that the Statesman kind of brought that 1910 brightness. That's really cool. That's an interesting spread. Awesome. Well, Joe, thank you so much for spending the evening with us and sharing the love of Old Forester with the group. We really appreciate it. I know this has been in the making for a while. We appreciate you, appreciate your time. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Likewise, and thank you all for being lovers of bourbon and not lovers of clout. That's a very, very big thing, and it's just it's from someone on the brand side. These are the kind of things that make me keep going. So thank you so much for letting me be of service, and I hope to as I continue to build up my stocks, maybe next time we do this, we can have some real fun.
This was delightful, man. Like, seriously, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you all so much.
Fantastic. Yeah.
That was great, Joe. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Enjoy your evenings, y'all.